Hello, welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Today, we're going to be focusing on Eastern philosophy. And we're going to be specifically talking about the philosophy behind Hinduism. And we're going to do that through checking out the works of the Upanishads. Now, the Upanishads are very early works. They're written around 800 to 400 BCE by sages and poets, and they break down several core Hindu concepts. It's interesting because the line between religion and philosophy when it comes to Eastern faiths is not as strong as it is in Western faiths. The thing about Hinduism is that you can practice it in a very individual way. So you can practice Hinduism and just focus more on the philosophical aspect of it as opposed to focusing on the religious aspects, the deities and such, just focusing more on the philosophical aspects. And you could practice Hinduism very successfully doing that. A lot of Eastern faiths are like that. Whereas a lot of Western faiths like Christianity, you have to acknowledge a lot of the religious aspects, a lot of the divine things like that. God and Jesus as a divinity, the Holy Spirit, those are really core concepts of Christianity. A lot of core concepts in Christianity are very difficult to break down philosophically. You can do it, it's just kind of difficult, and that's where theology addresses that issue. Eastern philosophy, there is theology in those faiths as well. There's a branch right there, but it's not as big as it is in the Western world because philosophy and religion over there, it's not so hard to merge the two. And the Upanishads demonstrates that very well. Let's jump to some quotes and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The first quote I want to share with you comes from the Katha Upanishad. You gotta excuse my Sanskrit, I hope I pronounced that right. Katha. Know that Atman as lord of a chariot and the body as the chariot itself. Know that reason is a charioteer and the mind indeed is the reins. The horses, they say, are the senses, and their paths are the objects of sense. When the soul becomes one with the mind and the senses, he is called one who has joys and sorrows. He who has not right understanding and whose mind is never steady is not the ruler of his life, like a bad driver with wild horses. But he who has right understanding and whose mind is ever steady is the ruler of his life, like a good driver with well-trained horses. He who has not right understanding is careless and never pure, reaches not the end of the journey, but wanders on from death to death. But he who has understanding is careful and ever pure, reaches the end of the journey, from which he never returns. The man whose chariot is driven by reason, who watches and holds the reins of his mind, reaches the end of the journey, the supreme everlasting spirit. Beyond the senses are their objects, and beyond the objects is the mind. Beyond the mind is pure reason, and beyond reason is the spirit in man. Beyond spirit in man is the spirit of the universe, and beyond is Purusha, the spirit supreme. Nothing is beyond Purusha. He is the end of the path. So there's this metaphor being made. There's a chariot. The chariot is the body. Horses are the senses. Senses like touch, taste, sight, hearing, smell. That's how we interact with the world, through our senses, right? That's how we're able to make perceptions about the world. The senses pull the body along this journey, life, but there needs to be a driver, and the driver is the mind. But the thing is, you have to merge the mind with the soul. Atman, in the context of Hinduism, is the soul, but it's specifically the soul beyond just the intellect. It's a soul not victim to the senses. You can use your mind and have a very strong intellect, but be victim to the horses, right? The senses. You could just use your senses to observe the world around you and make conclusions about the world. But then what happens is you're allowing your senses to take over. Similarly, like you're allowing the horses to kind of take over. What's being said here is that you gotta keep those senses in check. You gotta do that not just through the intellect, but also through the soul. And you gotta use the soul to keep the intellect in check and drive these wild horses that we call our senses, make them tame, right? So you use the soul with the intellect to develop pure reason, and then you're able to become a good driver of those horses in that chariot and move yourself along life in a beneficial way, as opposed to just letting the horses do whatever it is that they want to do. This is the difference between just intellectual reason and reason also with the soul involved. Let's continue with this metaphor. I'm going to go to the, here we go, Maitri Upanishad. Hope I pronounced that right. There is a spirit who is amongst the things of this world, and yet he is above the things of this world. He is clear and pure in the peace of a void of vastness. He is beyond the life of the body and the mind, never born, never dying, everlasting, ever one, in his own greatness. He is the spirit whose power gives consciousness to the body. He is the driver of the chariot. Even as a man who is asleep awakes, but when he is asleep does not know that he is going to awake. So a part of the subtle invisible spirit comes as a messenger to the body without the body being conscious of his arrival. A part of infinite consciousness becomes our own infinite consciousness with powers of discrimination and definition, and with false concepts. He is in truth Prajapati, Ajrat, and Visva, the source of creation and the universal in us all. The spirit is consciousness and gives consciousness to the body. He is the driver of the chariot. The poets say that this is a spirit who wanders on this earth from body to body, free from the light and darkness which follow our works. He is free because he is free from selfishness, and he is invisible, incomprehensible, hidden in darkness. He seems to work and not to be, but in truth he works not, and he is. He is in his own being pure, never changing, never moving, unpollutable. And in peace beyond desires, he watches the drama of the universe. He is hidden behind the veil of the three conditions and constituents of the universe. But in the joy of his law of righteousness, he is ever one. He is ever one. It's interesting that it talks about man asleep. When a man is asleep, in deep sleep, right, the senses aren't fully awake. They're deeply suppressed. But the mind is at work, even still, when you're in this deep sleep. You even dream, right, sometimes during this state. So during this state of sleep, you're free from the senses. So that's when true consciousness emerges, right? This is what I'm getting. And this is where the spirit can emerge as its true self, because the senses aren't driving the chariot, right? It's the spirit completely, the consciousness. The spirit is using the mind to drive the chariot while the senses are suppressed. This is true consciousness. Here we have this concept again about the limitations of what our senses / perceptions could give us and what's actually out there. Again, we come up with this idea a lot in other videos that I've done. If you focus all of your intellect on only the things that you can perceive with your senses, then you're not getting the full truth. There's more out there. Here we're jumping into the metaphysical. Listen to this. This is interesting. This is indeed the other soul, composed of the elements of the body, the Bhutatman, who is bound by the light or darkness, which follow works, and who, born again from good and evil, rises or falls in its wanderings, under the impulse of two contrary powers. And this is the explanation. There are 5 subtle elements, tanmatras, and those are called elements. There are also 5 gross elements, mahabhutas, and these are also called elements. The union of these is called the human body. The human soul rules the body, but the immortal spiritual soul is pure like a drop of water on a lotus leaf. The human soul is under the power of the 3 constituents and conditions of nature, and thus it falls into confusion. Because of this confusion, the soul cannot become conscious of the God who dwells within, whose power gives us power to work. The soul is thus whirled along the rushing stream of muddy waters of the 3 conditions of nature and becomes unsteady and wavering, filled with confusion and full of desires, lacking concentration and disturbed with pride. Whenever the soul has thoughts of I and mine, it binds itself with its lower self, as a bird with a net of a snare. That is very interesting, because the last video I did, I talked about Aristotle's The Metaphysics. What Aristotle will say is that there's a difference between the elements somebody is composed of and the person's principle. The person's principle is his true self. The elements are generalized descriptions that don't fully define a person. Yet most of the time we use these elements to try and create definitions of people. But that's not who they really are. Who they really are is their principle, their true self, their natural self. Here, it's kind of saying the same thing, in a way. You got two states of a soul, right? We got a soul composed of the elements that kind of make up a human body, but they're not the true self. The true self is the immortal spiritual soul. The human soul is kind of under the condition of these elements, so it can't really be its true self. Now, the infinite spiritual soul rises above all that, and in that way we're able to be our true selves. Now, it's not completely the same as Aristotle. A big difference is this de-emphasis of the individual, right? Whenever the soul has thoughts of I in mind, it binds itself with its lower self as a bird with the net of a snare. In Hinduism, a big thing is realizing that we're all one being. Every single individual is one. As opposed to Aristotle, who was talking about how it's very important to understand the definition of each and every individual, not to generalize people. It's pretty interesting, the connection, the differences, contrasting the two old school philosophies. Now, on that video, the Aristotle video on metaphysics, I had a comment, and the person was asking, well, if we can't really define ourselves with these elements, and when I say elements, I'm talking about, like, for example, the title of my channel, The Black Ponder, right? That's an element. Black is one element, ponder is another. African American thinker, right? That's not really me, and we use that type of descriptions all the time to try to define people, but that's not really what I am actually, truthfully. I mean, those are elements of me, but that's not what I truly am. But if you can't use those things to define me, what can we use? What is this principle? Like, what is it? Well, Aristotle said, well, it's possible that you're not going to be able to define that true self, at least using like science based on just the physical world. You got to get more metaphysical about it. This story that comes from Chandogya Upanishad, probably mispronounced that too, I think addresses this question quite well. Listen to this. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I'm just going to try and summarize. There was a boy and a father, and the father sent his boy to study the holy Vedas. The Vedas are even more fundamental than the Upanishads, which is fundamental. From the Vedas, you have the fundamental core concepts of Hinduism there. And the boy left, he was 12 years old. He studied the Vedas for 12 years. He came back, he's 24 now. He came back with a high ego to his dad. He's like, hey, look, I know everything now. I studied the Vedas for 12 years. There's a lot that I know. And the dad, who, you know, he's more humble, and he saw his prideful son. He's like, all right, let me put you in check and tell you things you don't know. Let me break it down for you, son. And he told his son, let me show you something. This is what he said. I'll read this part. The father says, bring me a fruit from this banyan tree. The son, here it is, father. All right, break it. It is broken, sir. What do you see in it? Very small seed, sir. Break one of them, my son. It is broken, sir. What do you see in it? Nothing at all, sir. This is what the father said. My son, from the very essence in the seed, which you cannot see, comes in truth this vast banyan tree. Believe me, my son, an invisible and subtle essence is the spirit of the whole universe. That is reality. That is Atman. Thou art that. Inside that seed where there seems to be nothing, right? That is the true essence of what that whole tree is undefinable, right? Because we don't perceive it with our senses. But that inside that seed, that's the essence of that object, the tree. That's what reality is. That's the true definition of what that tree is. Now the father said, okay, let me show you something else. He gives the son some salt, and the son puts the salt in some water, and they let the salt dissolve in the water. And then the father says, okay, bring me that salt that you put in the water. The son looked into the water but could not find it, for it had dissolved. His father then said, taste the water from this side. How is it? It is salt, said the son. The father says, taste it from the middle. How is it? Well, it's salt, said the son. Taste it from the side. How is it? Said the father. It's salt. Look for the salt again and come again to me. And he said, I cannot see the salt, I only see the water. His father then said, in the same way, O my son, you cannot see the Spirit, but in truth, he is there. An invisible and subtle essence is the Spirit of the whole universe. That is reality. That is truth. Thou art that. What we need to focus on is that although we can't perceive with our senses what the truth is, it is the truth. We can't put our entire intellect or mind into what we perceive. We have to transcend that sometimes to discover what true reality is. The father gives the son another example. He says, look, if I were to blindfold you and bring you all the way out to some unknown place and then take that blindfold off and tell you to go to a specific area, you would be in an area you didn't know anything about. So you'd have to wander around, right, and go to various villages, towns, and just look at the sky and the world. And you would have to just figure that out. Be like, okay, I gotta figure this out. Instead of just from the get-go knowing completely exactly where you're at, you'd have to spend some time and wander about and journey and wrestle with this lack of knowledge and find the true way to your destination. Here's a quote. Meditation is the truth higher than thought. The earth seems to rest in silent meditation, and the waters and the mountains and the sky and the heavens seem all to be in meditation. Whenever a man attains greatness on this earth, he has his reward according to his meditation. So one of the core concepts of Hinduism described in the Upanishads is this idea that you cannot rely on your intellect alone, your mind, completely. The mind is important to use, but truth lies outside the realm of thought. You have to have faith in the undefinable, because the truth is undefinable. So that commenter on my video about Aristotle's metaphysics, he was concerned that, well, how do we define something if we can't really define somebody based off the elements? I mean, what is this principle? Can somebody really be defined? How do we do it? Well, have faith in the undefinable. Just because you can't define somebody purely with your thought, it doesn't mean you can't reach the truth. Much of the truth lies in the metaphysical. And we have to put our egos in check and understand that we cannot intellectualize everything, right? There's some things that are just unknowable, and there's truth in those things. So we have to act accordingly. In both Eastern and Western philosophy, that idea is present. Now, I'm not a Hindu, I'm a Christian, but I do have many Hindu friends, and I respect the religion for the philosophy that it presents. It truly has some very beautiful and useful philosophy that we can use in our life. So just because you're not a Hindu doesn't mean you can't read the Upanishads and get some value out of it. I encourage you to do such. It's a great philosophical work. Well, you've been listening to The Black Ponder. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.